Ace Podcast.
Hey, I'm Eddie.
And I'm John from Moderately Informed.
And you're listening to Vaguely Accurate on the Ace Podcast Network.
Welcome everyone to another episode of Vaguely Accurate. Thank you very much for joining us. And today we are joined by Oliver. Hey man.
Hello, how you all going?
We are all good, I assume.
Oh yeah, hopefully.
Hopefully.
I seriously hope
So do you mind introducing yourself a little bit and telling us a little bit about what your field is?
So my name's Oliver Barley. I'm doing my PhD at Edith Cowan University. I'm in exercise physiology, and I'm particularly right now, I'm looking at more so neurophysiology, or neuromuscular physiology, I should say. So what I'm looking at is, my research has been into combat sports, and I've been mostly interested in the process of weight cutting, which I'm not sure how many people who compete in combat sports listen, but just as a brief overview, combat sports are restricted by weight classes. And what people will do is, say I weigh 83 kilos, I want to fight at the 77 kilo division. What I'll do is I'll lose weight quickly and then and then weigh in and then put the weight back on as quick as I can so that I can then go to the fight as the bigger guy. So I've done some weight cutting before, and it's just one of the things I wanted to look into because I know there's virtually every fighter does it.
Yeah, I've done it. And you've done it, and if you look on any UFC or boxing, there was weight cutting all around. You look how shredded some people are for the weigh-ins, and then you look at them actually competing, and you're just like, definitely a little bit.
You see the other week, Khabib Nurmagomedov pulled out of his fight with Tony Ferguson, I believe, because of weight cutting. He was hospitalized from weight cutting. He ended up having, I think it was acute kidney failure.
Jesus.
Yeah.
Dehydration?
Dehydration, because his weight cut was so big. Jose Aldo, you watch Jose Aldo in fights when he's in his training camp and he's doing a 1 hour Shark Tank and he looks fresh, and then he goes to a fight and the fourth and fifth round he's just dead. It's weight cutting is it's a big thing in combat sports, and the research already on dehydration is quite conflicted. And there's virtually no research on dehydration followed by rehydration. So it's almost non-existent. So what we have, there's a decent amount of research right now in how dehydration affects your performance if you're dehydrated. So we know if you dehydrate more than 2% of your body mass, you will have a noticeable drop in aerobic performance. Okay. Now, some people have argued that can be mitigated by the use of a fan. I could probably... There's some arguments to be made against that, but either way, if we look at combat sports, they don't take place over a giant fan or outdoors. So if there's a giant fan, you can throw your opponent into the fan. It'd be pretty savage.
You might get it in WWE. That's bad.
Yeah. WWE. But so the point is, wind resistance isn't something that can reduce that. So what we do is we see a noticeable performance, and then anaerobic performance, so short-term, more explosive performance, it's a bit mixed. It's still, the research is a bit mixed. Some studies showing no effect, some studies showing an effect. But there's a recent meta-analysis, I believe, posted last year. Really good study, and it shows that dehydration pretty much affects anaerobic performance as well. Okay. But the thing Negatively.
Okay.
So the thing we look at now is that dehydration affects performance, but virtually nobody has looked at what happens if I let them rehydrate and test them 3 hours later.
Okay.
And so if you're a combat sports athlete and you go, oh, look at all these studies showing dehydration is bad, and then they'll just go, oh, but look, they had no recovery, so I'll be fine. So there's been a couple of studies, there are some, but there's a good number of limitations to them, and one study does not a consensus make.
No, it doesn't.
So that was the purpose of my research, was when I finished my bachelor's and decided to go in and I could either do an honours or a master's, and I looked at the project I wanted to do, and most people do quite small projects for their honours. They do survey studies. I wanted to do a full lab trial. Yeah. So I was like, I'm going to do my master's. So I did a master's, so I had 2 years to do it, and we did this large lab trial. It was it was a bad time for me. Conducting that lab trial was
so much of a learning curve.
Oh yeah.
So many, and those
Equipment
learning curves aren't all good.
Equipment will always break. No matter what it is, equipment will break. I had virtually every piece of equipment that could go wrong. I had virtually everything that could go wrong. I had subjects dropping out at the last minute. I had every problem in the book. I should have done a survey study. But yeah, so I wanted to look at that because really there are some studies, but they don't. I haven't seen really solid lab trials as well. Because a lab trial is really hard to pull off as well. There's a lot of issues right now. I guess I'm just going to keep rambling. So you'll have to jump in at some point if you want.
You keep rambling for this point, then I'm actually you go, and then I'll jump in a second. I have
a big thing that I talk about quite a lot, which is the trade-off between ecological validity and scientific validity.
Okay.
So ecological validity is the practicality of finding, whereas scientific validity, so lab validity, is control. So
yep, I understand that.
Yeah, so there's a huge trade-off for this. So some scientists fall into one camp or the other, and what you'll find is some scientists want you to conduct a study that every factor is controlled, which makes sense to control something. Yeah,
and that's the discipline of science. They want to control every parameter and just focus on one variable.
Exactly.
Ideally.
I would argue that you can't and get realistic results. You have to sacrifice some lab control for ecological validity. So
I would argue that when it comes to people.
Yeah, well that's exactly. But when it comes to things like examining how cancer cells work in a dish, obviously you don't need to make sacrifices for ecological validity. But when it comes to combat sports, for example, a criticism of my previous study was I didn't control what athletes ate in the recovery phase or drank. Mm-hmm. So what I did was I told them to do what they would normally do, and then I made them replicate it for the control trial as well.
Yep.
So they did the same thing both times because I had a repeated measures design. Now, I've had arguments made that because I didn't control it, that my results could be because of that. And the answer is yes, it could have. But the thing is, if I force the athletes to do say I make them a recovery diet and think that may be what reduces their performance. Yeah. It may not be the dehydration. It may be because I've made them do something they wouldn't normally do. And then that reduces their performance. And I go, oh, look at this. Their performance is ruined. So there's a trade-off you have to make, which is just, it's one of the issues of trying to conduct big lab trials that are realistic, especially with human subjects. It's really easy to conduct a lab. If it was cycling, it'd be much easier.
That's my next question. With combat sports, how would you define the performance level of combat sports? So,
oh my god!
Would you say it's really short, intense bursts? Would you say it's a continuous bout? How would you?
You wouldn't believe how hard that is to determine. There's a couple of studies right now. Basically, there's no clear answer. Even now, from a scientific perspective, combat sports are so hard to analyze. So,
I mean, do you narrow it down to a single discipline of combat sports as well? That's the other thing. Are you looking at, in your case, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu cohort, or are you going to be looking at a boxing cohort?
In my master's study, we looked at exclusively MMA.
Okay.
For my PhD, we'll be looking at pretty much people from any combat sport, because depending on the study, because my PhD has 3 studies. Mm-hmm. So the first study is a survey study on, basically we're sending out a survey massively to people all around the world and getting them to fill it in about how they lose weight for competitions. I've already been doing it now. We've got over 800 people have filled it in. So
you have software to analyze this?
Oh yeah, well, I'm pretty much going to have to
that works.
That's the thing. I don't think I have any software that's going to do it well, so I'm probably going to have to filter it all myself into Excel and then do it that way.
That's going to be a fun afternoon for you.
Oh, that is going to be a horrible time for me. But my second study is looking at combat sports athletes specifically and how weight cutting, so acute dehydration, so we're not including the food restriction, but just the dehydration affects their neuromuscular performance, so the neuromuscular systems. And then my third study looks into how people can, if it's possible, to acclimatize yourself to dehydration. So we know people can be acclimated to heat, but we don't know if people can be acclimated to dehydration.
When you refer to acclimated, you're talking about if they do it often enough that the body's just used to this. Cool, I'm going to recover in a couple of hours. We're all good.
Yeah. So we have this idea that it's possible that if you could include regular, like smaller weight cuts in a training camp, you could actually make it so that someone could cut weight really easy without any of the with less of the negative effect.
That's a powerful tool, especially in such a short, performance variable between athletes.
That's exactly it. But I guess I don't know how I got to that topic because you asked me about performance, but basically, they're great. But for combat sports performance, we have a lot of different things. It's not like an Olympic lift. An Olympic lift, we know, is an anaerobic, under 10 seconds explosive activity.
Yeah.
Job done. Cycling, we know it's a lot of hours at a threshold intensity generally. But it's a much easier thing to replicate. You can get a cycle ergometer and get someone to do a time trial. You've got a good measure now of how they're going to cycle, as long as you give it adjusting resistances. But combat sports, there are so many different tests. You can't just get the most realistic test would be to get two people and make them fight each other. But the issue is,
honestly, that's what I was going to say. Can't you to categorize every combat sport? You get a boxer and you get a bunch of instrumentation on their chest to measure their heart rate, their pulse, everything like that. Give them and you do that with a huge cohort of boxers. Get a solid study on that.
Well,
do that with
it depends what you're measuring it during though, because this is one of the criticisms I've had of punching machines. So one of the things people use is this. It's a really cool piece of equipment. They have it at the Australian Institute of Sport, which is basically it's this big punch bag stuck to a wall essentially, and it's got force transducers in it, so it can feel the force when you hit it. There's high speed cameras on the outside of it, so they can see the speed of the punch and all that. So what they can see is if you do 1 minute of maximal punching, they can see the force that you generate, the amount of punches you throw, the speed that you throw them. Now, the issue being is that combat sports technique is variable. How far are they standing away from the bag? How low are their hands usually? Because maybe they get fatigued and they keep their hands much lower. They generate the same amount of punches, but because they're saving energy and holding their hands up, but now they've lost defense. So ecologically, it wouldn't actually apply to a fight because they get KO'd because they're not guarding their face. So it's if you get someone to do punching, striking, or even grappling movements, there's a lot of variation, which makes it almost impossible to measure doing combat sports specific movements. Now, there are some people that would disagree, I would imagine, and there are some things you can do. However, it's a big sacrifice if you're going to allow, because if I let a boxer do sparring, because I've seen a study which basically its measure was we got them to do this weight cut and then got them basically to spar.
Okay.
And they analysed the hits landed, the hits dodged. And it was basically
they took the MMA scorecard.
Yeah, they essentially took the MMA scorecard. Now the problem is, if you're feeling bad on one day, you've just ruined every measure because it's like, oh, I'm not as good at if you just have a bad day, or say you decide, oh, I'm tired because I've weight cut. What I'm going to do is play the slow game and be evasive, and then it's like, oh look, he barely got hit. Weight cutting improved performance.
Style. So you're not, when you say combat sports, we're not just talking, going back to the original question. When you say combat sports, we're not just, you've got combat sports as a big thing, and then you've got each discipline in sport, and then below that, each different style or technique associated with
so
that
many different
sport.
kinds of karate.
And then God, there's tons.
Yeah.
Absolute tons. And then below the skill you've got and the technique you've got, then I suppose the actual parameters that you could be measuring, and you have to be associate each parameter, each skill to each discipline, and that's not been done clearly.
Yeah.
So
I don't think you can. I really don't think there is a way to measure combat sports performance like that. I can't think of a way. Maybe there is one, but
maybe technology improves.
Maybe, but the problem is the variation, because one of the things we have a big theory that is that weight cutting serves as a nocebo effect, which is the opposite of a placebo effect. So a placebo is when you have something that happens to you and then you perform better because of it psychologically. Now the nocebo is when something happens to you and you perform worse psychologically because of it. Now you can't hide that someone's cut weight in a study. Mm-hmm. So they know they've done it. And a lot of guys feel really bad. And that feeling is what I believe can influence their central drive. So when they go, oh, I feel really bad. When you feel really bad, you don't go as hard at training usually. And that's pretty...
I know that very well.
Yes, and that's one of the things I think weight cutting can influence is you've done this horrible experience where you've been dragged out of a bath by people. You get in a heat bath, you get in a sauna, everything's going wrong, and you then have to get in a cage and punch a dude in the face and get punched in the face the next day. The belief that it's going to affect you may affect you. So the inference being, though, that effect may change your style as well. And as soon as you change the style, you've ruined the experiment if you are assessing something that is style dependent. So how many punches you output, how much you move, any of that. If your style is affected by a nocebo effect, that may be exactly what's causing it. Now, a nocebo effect is still an effect. I would like to point that out. It's a scientific effect, so we can still measure it. But the issue being, you may get some really, really dodgy measures because of psychological impacts. So for my study, we designed a new test from the ground up, which was a repeat sled push test. So using a strength and conditioning sled, they had 10 meters. So 10 meters to run it over. So what we knew from time motion analysis studies, which is when you study an event and you break it down into high intensity versus low intensity using computer software. And obviously humans have to run the software. But the point is, we know that mixed martial arts, for example, has a high intensity to low intensity ratio of about 1 to 2 to 1 to 4. So for every, say, second of high intensity activity you'll have about 2 to 4 seconds of low intensity activity.
Okay.
So what we did was design a test based on that. So a sled push is one thing MMA athletes commonly do in training. Like it's a thing they use in training. For rest, it determines, like for example, throwing takedowns. It's a whole body activity, even though people think it's all leg. Stabilizing with the upper body is quite an intense thing to do. So you've got the whole body working, and what they do is they've got 10 meters and they do a maximal sprint, and that might take them 4 seconds, maybe. Let's say 4 seconds. Yeah. I think it averaged out at 5 now that I remember. So say they take 5 seconds and then they've got 20 seconds to do a 20-meter recovery jog. So a brisk walk or a light run back to the sled before they have to push it again. So that creates 5 seconds of high intensity activity and 20 seconds of low.
Yeah.
And then they do that 30 times.
Oh.
Yes.
Oh, poor fellas.
Yes.
Feelers, that's
I know.
rough.
I saw a good amount of vomit in that study. Now, and basically the total test took about 13 minutes, usually. So it's close to a 15-minute fight. It has the right high intensity to low intensity ratio. It allows for some changes in technique, so you can adjust your hands and you can adjust your running pattern, but it's quite controlled.
Yeah.
Now, it's not as controlled as doing, say, a VO2 max test or a Wingate test where someone goes on a bike and goes maximally for 30 seconds. It's not as controlled as that, but it's more controlled than letting guys spar. We designed it as the middle ground of the both, because it also gives us a measure of almost everything. Your first few sprints give us a good measure of anaerobic power, your ability to your anaerobic system's function. And then the thing is, any activity that's longer than 2 minutes is going to be mostly aerobic. So we then know the rest of that test, as you see that decrement, is going to be aerobically caused, most likely.
Yep.
So we can look at anaerobic and aerobic performance of a simulated MMA bout, essentially, the way physiologically you would respond to an MMA bout.
And what did you find from this? So this was just to confirm where we are. So we're talking right now about your masters.
Yes.
And we're talking, and for your master's project, you're looking at how the aerobic and anaerobic conditions of a combat sport athlete change with their dehydration.
Yeah, so we got guys to dehydrate 5% of their body mass in 3 hours.
Okay.
Using heat exposure.
Push sled.
Pre-push sled, yeah. So, pre-push sled. So they turn up, we take their blood, we take their urine, do a couple of assessments using that, which I can talk about at some point. The limitations will do that of assessing hydration. It's an absolute horrible thing to do, but I'll save that for later. So we take this blood, we take this urine, we take their body mass, and then what we do is we get them to lose the weight. So they'll go in the heat chamber. We have a climate chamber at ECU. It's quite a cool piece of equipment. They put on rubber suits and they don't drink and they sit in heat. And they exercised in heat. So it was very light cycling for 3 hours. Okay. Now, once they lost that weight, so 3 hours they had to do, we pulled them out of the chamber. We took the blood, took the urine, all that stuff, took the body weight. And then we got them to, they had 3 hours to rehydrate and refeed. They could do whatever they wanted within reason. They couldn't shoot up like steroids. They couldn't do anything like that. Yeah, exactly. So within reason, they could do whatever they wanted. The only condition was they had to replicate that for their second session. Okay. So it would be either a control first or an intervention first. If they had their control first, I just told them, because the control session, when they went into that climate chamber, it would be set to a nice comfortable temperature and they wouldn't be wearing a sweatsuit, and then they would be doing exercise on the bike, the same exercise. Mm-hmm. For the control session, they just had to guess what they would want during a weight cut and hope they guessed right, because if they want something else come the week of the weight cut, they won't be able to have it. But they do that 3 hours. Then we take the blood, urine again, and then we get them to do this sled push test, along with a couple of things like a medicine ball chest throw, a vertical jump test, and a wrist grip test. But then they do this sled test. And so basically what that gives us is, how does 5% dehydration influence performance? Well, influence repeat effort performance. Yep. That's because there's a big problem in saying MMA performance, because we're not assessing MMA performance. We're not assessing how well someone's going to fight. Now, we're assessing how well their repeat capacities will function. That will relate to fighting. Yep. So if we find it reduces repeat capacity, so repeat effort performance, we can then say, well, you're not going to perform as well in MMA because you won't have as good repeat effort performance. And MMA, in any combat sport actually, is basically just repeat efforts.
I can now see the relevance of why you've chosen this in comparison to your practical efforts of designing a study versus control efforts.
That's exactly it. So what we do is we know that based off that, we can see how it affects their repeat efforts. Now, what we found, we did it at both 3 hours following the weight cut and 24 hours. Mm-hmm. Because professional events, 24 hours, amateur events, and some Olympic events, which are 3 hours. So what we do then is we found that repeat effort capacity overall was reduced by, I think it was about 19% 3 hours following, and about 14% 24 hours later. Okay. So when it comes to overall performance, that is a huge benefit. One of the sayings we typically use in sports science is that 1% is the difference between not getting it, so coming last in the Olympics and getting the gold medal.
And so 14 to 19% is a huge.
It's absolutely huge. And
so what you can almost summarize is just train at the weight you're going to compete.
Well, what I would say is consider the cost-benefit analysis. So maybe you get a benefit from losing some weight. So say you're going to sacrifice 19% performance. Mm-hmm. Make sure that you're gaining more than 19% in being in the lower weight class. So what I think my master study shows is that people probably still could be cutting weight, just less weight. 5% is too much. Obviously, 5% in a short period of time, which is extremely common in combat sports, like using dehydration.
How much is 5%? Just to give me a bit of scale. I'm just trying to think. Like, let's say an average 80 kilo guy.
You asked me to do a quick. I think it would be somewhere in the area of 4 kilos.
4 or 3 kilos. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it'd be 4.2 or something like that. Mm-hmm. It'd be something in that. I think 4.2.
That's 5. A lot of weight. It feels like a lot of weight. It is for me. I weigh 61 kilos, 64 kilos. That's ridiculous.
It would be it is a lot of weight, but that is what we see from the survey data, is that that's common. That's extremely common in professional combat sports. There's a study by Crichton in 2015, I believe it's published, and it showed that MMA athletes were losing, I'm trying to remember off the top of my head, I think it was 5%. It was basically, I think it was 5% in the 24 hours leading up to the fight and a further 5% within a few hours of the fight. So people were losing up to 10% within, I think it was definitely 10% within a few days of the fight. And definitely it was about 5% within a couple of hours of the weigh-in on top of that. I was getting people...
not even sound healthy.
No, exactly. And now the thing is, there's a lot of research showing that dehydration is bad for your health. That's obvious. Now, here's the thing. If you tell a person that's going to get into a cage and get elbowed in the face that dehydration is bad for their health, they're unlikely to care. Because their health is obviously not their primary priority here. If you're getting elbowed in the face, clearly you don't mind some damage to your body. So I think a better approach is to say it's going to hurt your performance. Because they do it for performance. So if I can show, don't cut 5%, cut 2%. If you cut 2 in 24 hours, I would bet pretty strongly it's not going to affect your performance. Do that. Cut less weight. You'll still be able to fight in a lower weight class, but you won't be able to, you'll perform much better. I would rather fight someone who is the same size as me and be in good physical shape and feel good than fight someone who's 60 kilos when I'm feeling terrible. Because someone who's 60 kilos, they put you know from jiu-jitsu, you fight the smaller guys, it's not an easy roll.
Oh, no way. They're faster. They may not be as strong, but God, they're like rabbits all over your back.
They'll do the half guard escape to the back, just straight away. They'll take you back. You got nothing. So the point is, I would rather be in good physical shape than sacrifice performance to be a bigger man, because honestly, being the bigger man is not that much an advantage. It is an advantage, but if it's a matter of a couple of kilos, it's not going to make a huge difference.
A couple of kilos does not make that much of a big difference.
Well, if you look at Roy Nelson, like a couple of kilos for him is mostly fat. The difference between, if he lost all his fat, he'd probably be a light heavyweight. Not probably, he'd definitely be a light heavyweight. So he's fighting heavyweights, and it's like, oh, it's fair because they're the same weight. Well, fat mass is useless, essentially. Like, the amount of fat mass he has is useless. Maybe it serves as some insulation to body shots, but that's kind of the point. Is that we're seeing this loss in performance, which again, one study does not a consensus make.
No, indeed.
But there's a couple of other studies showing similar results, and I think what we can take from that is that at bare minimum, people should be losing less weight.
Yeah,
I think that would be the takeaway from my study. Now,
I think we should go into the limitations, because you've mentioned that you had a few.
Of the master study,
yeah. So, you've had a few small limitations here. Without going into too long of a rant, how do you think you could explain what you've experienced?
So I'm trying to get the study published right now, and we've had, I think, 4 rejections so far. Now, rejections are common in science. It's not 4 is actually not unheard of. Everybody tells me for the first study you're trying to publish, that's extremely normal, but still. A lot of the things we're seeing is that people, first of all, a limitation in, which I already kind of mentioned before, which was, were we measuring MMA performance? What were we actually measuring? And I think the counter to that is we weren't measuring performance. MMA performance. We were measuring repeat effort performance. And you need to take that needs to be taken with a grain of salt when you see the results. Mm-hmm. So if your plan is if you're a fighter who always finishes people in the first round, then
probably not relevant to you.
Maybe it doesn't matter, because our results showed that the repeat effort capacity got the hindrance got greater over time.
Yeah.
At the start, it wasn't too big. By the end, it was massive.
So if you're in a championship bout, 5 rounds, 5 minutes, and maybe you do finish in first round guys, but if you know this guy is going to be a struggle for you, you know it has the potential to go on for that long. Is it really worth putting for you through that effort?
Also, the difficulty of measuring hydration, which is just, I can summarize this probably in like a couple of minutes, but basically we don't have a measure of hydration.
I was going to ask that, how do you measure it?
Well, we have lots of measures. None of them are a gold standard. There's some people, for my study, we did urine osmolality, urine specific gravity, percentage of hematocrit in the blood, so the ratio of red blood cells to plasma, serum osmolality, and body weight. They're 5 measures. Still doesn't give us a really good idea of hydration. Hydration, because here's the thing. When you measure urine, you're measuring a filtrate from the blood, which is a filtrate from the cells. And you want to know what's going on in the cells. You're 2 levels removed from the cells now. Yeah. If you measure the blood, you're 1 level removed from the cells. Just because the fluid has returned to the blood doesn't mean it's returned to the cells.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the problem we run into. Serum osmolality is probably the best measure we have. But the thing is, I don't think it's an overly good measure.
Is it just ethically or not safe to get the cells?
Well, you could take a muscle biopsy.
Okay, that's...
You could do a muscle biopsy. I'm not aware of any way you could test hydration doing that. I haven't done it myself. There must be a way. You could use an ultrasound or imaging technique to see the size of the cells, and you'd get a pre and post, and you'd be able to get a comparison that way. But the problem is biopsies are extremely invasive.
Oh, incredibly. And especially if you're going to start retesting performance pre and post, and you miss a little bit of the bicep, they're not going to be able to...
As soon as you've done a biopsy, you can't test performance anymore.
No.
Unless it's a completely different muscle. So you would take it from the quadriceps, most likely. And the way a biopsy works, if anybody doesn't know, you get basically a surgical incision. You make a little incision in the quad, you stick a tube in there, and then you stick basically a metal hook, and you rip out a piece of muscle. That's essentially the way you do a biopsy.
I know for a fact that in human trials and studies, they really struggle to retain and keep people. Yeah. If you start saying and this is usually in passive studies, if you start claiming that you're going to start ripping muscle and flesh from them.
Yeah, people don't like it.
People don't like that.
People do not like it. So you generally avoid doing biopsies unless there's no other way. And
you said there were some issues with the urine as well. I need to hear about those.
Oh. Urine is just the most useless measure. Like urine is so one of the things I've seen I think it's California, state of California has implemented or is trying to implement a weight cutting protocol, which is people have to pass a urine specific gravity test to be counted as hydrated.
Okay.
That is...
What is urine specific gravity?
Urine specific gravity is basically the amount of molecules that are in the urine. So for example, if you're hydrated, there'll be more water in your urine.
Yep.
So what that means is...
it's like a mass spectrometry on your urine.
Yeah. So what you do is the less water that's in your urine, the more that the things like urea and the other things that you filter out the percentage will be higher because there'll be less water.
Yeah. Okay.
So it's essentially assessing that. Now, the issue is 1.02 or under. So 1.02 or over is determined as dehydrated.
Okay.
Do you know where we got that number?
No.
Neither do I. No one does.
Okay. Yeah. I see a flaw there. I feel like there should be some kind of study.
No one knows.
No studies.
Me and my supervisor have spent a lot of time looking for that study. Maybe it exists. If someone here knows it, please send it to me. But it doesn't exist. Look, it's currently at least it's just an arbitrary number.
That's odd. Like
it's just look at this number. Most people, I would bet.
Do you feel good at this number? Yes. Okay.
Most people would sit over 1.02. Most people at almost any given time.
Yeah.
And that's not a bad thing. It's fine. It's not badly dehydrated, but they're going to use this as a measure that someone can lose their income because they didn't meet it. This arbitrary test that is incredibly variable. It's a terrible idea. It's an absolutely terrible idea. It makes absolutely no sense if you understand how we measure hydration. But they obviously don't understand that. And they've gone, can we do a hydration measure? And they've gone, the easiest one is you get a urinary refractometer, get a bit of urine, put it on, look through, you've got USG.
That's silly.
It's easy. It's cheap to do. But the thing is, it's unreliable and we don't even know what we're measuring. We don't even know what is a good USG. It's the worst. It's a terrible measure.
I can see that you're quite passionate about that, and I completely agree. It does seem a completely terrible measure, especially with very little scientific evidence to back that claim, that number up, and it just seems... it just seems like an arbitrary number that doesn't...
It is a completely arbitrary number that means basically nothing, which... It's unbelievable that is what can cause someone to lose their income.
Yeah.
And when people use that so for example, there's a lot of studies into hydration that show, look, people are dehydrated and all they've used is USG.
Mm-hmm.
It still means nothing. Like one of the only ways you can use USG is in a repeated measures design. So for example, in my study, we had them in their control and them in the weight after the weight cut at the same time. We can look at their USG. Now we can see a difference. We can see a change. But here's the thing. In my master's study, at various different times, different measures of hydration said they were hydrated and different ones said they were dehydrated. We virtually never had all five of them saying the same thing.
Huh.
Yeah, because hydration measures are just really variable.
Like I said, chuck it in the appendix and just be like, choose which variable you wish, because
that's it. Because this is how bad USG. My God! So USG on average.
You've got a minute to rant, okay? And then we're gonna.
Okay. I'm gonna go for it. USG. For me, immediately following the weight cut, it said they were dehydrated. 3 hours later, it said they were perfectly hydrated. 24 hours later, it said they were dehydrated. It doesn't even make sense. It's clear that this is not a strong measure to analyze, because then you can trick it. I can scull a bottle of water and 15 minutes later, or probably 30 minutes later, my urine will be like, oh, look, my USG's gone down loads, but it's not in my cells. I haven't reduced the impact for concussion risk that it has because my brain volume's decreased from dehydration, so that it rattles around in the skull more. I haven't changed that. I haven't done anything. All I've done is made my pee clear.
Which I actually must say I've seen as a test scale for hydration in some like oil and gas industries. Like
they use the colour.
They just have the colour card and they're just like, you seem to be a little dehydrated.
Eat something that has protein in it or have a multivitamin and your urine goes yellow straight up.
Yeah, straight away.
It means nothing.
Okay, so lastly, we've got a few minutes left of the episode. Do you mind giving us a brief overview of what your PhD is going to be about? Because you've just started that and you've just gained approval, which is fantastic, and congratulations. Are you able to give us...
Yeah, so my PhD is looking at the neuromuscular physiology. So what we're going to do is get people to do this weight cut, so a similar weight cut, and then we're going to see how it affects neuromuscular functions. There's a lot of ways we can do that. One of the ways is using femoral nerve stimulation. So we get a little electric pen, and I place it on their femoral nerve, and I can use that to shock them and make their quadriceps contract.
Yeah. Now,
there's a couple of things we can do with this. We can get maximal recruitment, which is an M wave, which rather than going into all of that here, I'll just it's a thing, and it gives me maximal recruitment. We can also use interpolated twitch, which is a very controversial measure, but I'm using it in measure with a lot of other things. So that's basically, you get someone to do a maximal voluntary contraction. Yeah. And at the point of maximal contraction, you shock them. And that extra force you're determining is, because when you do femoral nerve stimulation, you're cutting out from the brain to the muscle. So basically, because central fatigue is the factor that the limitation of the brain reducing its input. So the brain stops sending signals to the muscle to reduce the activity. Now, there's a lot of theories that a large portion of fatigue actually occurs in the brain and not in the muscle. The muscle could... So it's one of those things, your brain will quit before your body will. It's probably true.
Interesting.
Yeah. So the brain will just go, nah, I've had enough, and stop sending signals.
I mean, it's like a fuse box for your muscles almost. It's going to trip before you do damage.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly how it works. So what we do is we know that what we can do then is we can shoot the femoral nerve with electric. So that means any extra force generated is stuff that was reduced from the brain. So it's what the brain wasn't doing. So that extra force we know is that the brain wasn't sending signal through. Now, there's a lot of criticisms of the interpolated twitch and that it's not an overly reliable measure and all these things. It's probably not, but having read the data. But the thing is, we then have rate of force development. We then have fatiguing time. We have a lot of other things. We have contractile properties like time to peak twitch and things like that. We have a lot of properties we can look at as well as just this interpolated twitch. Yep. And it's like hydration again. We're going to put forward 6 or 7 measures and go, oh, look, here's what they say. If they all trend in one direction, we can probably say that dehydration reduces central fatigue.
Okay, and central fatigue is, as we just said, almost a safety switch or the fuse box.
Yeah, exactly. So it's exactly like that. And then neuromuscular function as well. So we want to look at for example, we have this test we can do with muscle pads, which lets us test the muscle at different hertzes. And at different frequencies, we hit the muscle with stimulations. And based on the rate of force development and some things, we can actually determine how calcium is functioning inside the muscle.
That's interesting.
So we can look at calcium loss and muscle, like calcium sensitivity in the muscle.
And what's the application of knowing calcium loss in the body?
Well, one of the applications is we understand where this fatigue comes from, because right now with dehydration and rehydration, we really don't. I could talk for another hour on that. But we also know that may allow us to make some ergogenic aids. So maybe there's a supplement you could take that would help. If we know calcium sensitivity is lower, and we know some ways that maybe having something with calcium in it might help. Maybe drinking milk might help. Maybe if we know that the calcium sensitivity is down, maybe having things like Otozuka 1, which it's like Powerade but actually efficient. It's a Japanese Powerade. It's pretty good. So basically maybe that can help bring more into the cells and make things more efficient. So when we know how the fatigue works, we can then diagnose how to fix it.
So that seems like an incredibly important parameter for elite athletes in
performance
definitely. Conditions. The amount of money that's invested in those things, if you're able to give anyone the cutting edge, same in Formula One, they spend thousands and millions and millions on that centimetre of performance extra in their car. So
definitely.
This is the same, what you're doing in theory for the humans.
Exactly.
And one question I wanted to ask is, you're looking at calcium, as a parameter to see if that's one of the sources of fatigue.
Yeah.
Why did you choose calcium?
So calcium is involved in cross-bridging in the muscle. So calcium is basically the thing that the sarcoplasmic reticulum, I'll try not to get too physiology into it, but basically the actual calcium is the thing that makes your muscles contract, essentially.
Okay.
The actual movement factor. So your actin and myosin are sitting there, and when the calcium comes in, that's when they all grab together and start pulling, and that's how your muscles work.
Okay.
So that's one of the theories behind cramps, for example, involuntary calcium leaking.
As opposed to the potassium that people keep saying bananas.
Yeah, exactly. Well, potassium can also affect the calcium reuptake and calcium release. Yeah. So that's why sodium and potassium can influence calcium too. But what we see is that if you release a load of calcium into the muscle, it will start contracting. So
no, that makes sense. That makes sense. It's like calcium's part of the voltage gates that you have in your body.
Yeah, exactly. So a lot of people know that when they learn the action potential, it's the sodium and potassium flipping around in the nerve cell. But when it comes to the muscle, the end point, the nerve cell hits the muscle and that releases calcium. Yeah. That's exactly what the stimulation does, is it releases calcium. So if there's less calcium, or the calcium's not releasing efficiently, then it's going to affect performance, or likely will affect performance.
Sounds about right.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for coming on the show.
I've basically just come on and ranted for...
No, that's good. I love hearing and learning, and we made it 40-ish minutes.
Good. Well, if anybody wants to take part in my studies, please hit me up.
If you want me to, I'm definitely...
I would love you to. That's great. I can, for my second study, I need combat sports athletes, but for my third study, my acclimation study, I can have anybody.
Okay.
Unless you have a chronic disease. But yeah.
Okay.
If you have heart disease, you don't need to apply.
Yeah, you're probably okay.
I'd rather not risk you.
So, thank you very much. And have you got any contact information for anyone to get a hold of you?
I'm on Twitter, so Oliver Barley. I think it's at Oliver Barley, so Barley. That's probably an easy way to do it.
I'll chuck you in the comment description.
Yeah, maybe that's probably the best way to contact me. There's also obarley@our.ecu.edu.au. That's if you want to email me.
I'll also chuck that in the description.
Yeah, you can go ahead, but yeah.
Awesome, guys. That's us for today.
Right,
thank you very much. Take care. This is a good day to do a podcast. You're getting free chicken.